This is Pastor G with Forward Podcast, and I have the privilege of being with somebody who I believe really has a message that I think really needs to get out. And so we're going to spend a little time talking to him. His name is Freeway, Rick, the man Ross. Why don't you say hello to the people?
How y'all doing?
A lot of people that are probably listening to me right now don't really know when I say Freeway Rick Ross. A lot of them keying on Rick Ross, and they don't really know. They're like, huh? What? So can you help them understand a little bit more about exactly who you are?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles in the early 60s, 70s, and 80s. Was striving to be a tennis pro. Was good enough to go to college and play tennis, but I never learned how to read or write, so my tennis career was derailed for lack of education. I started selling drugs in 1979. Went on to make as much as $3 million in one day. Got arrested, got a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Taught myself how to read and write while I was in prison. And here we are today, to make it short and sweet.
Yeah. Okay. So to expand on that, I don't think people really, we cannot underestimate when you say, you kind of got into selling drugs. You weren't just what some people are probably thinking about, somebody standing on the corner, right, dealing drugs. You were doing. You were doing it on a different level. You brought some different level skills to the game.
Level. Yeah, I started with $125, but at the height of my career, I was doing $3 million a day sometimes. For 2 years, I did at least $1 million, and from $1 million up to $3 million for 2 years in a row. So I became a major player.
So major player, that means you had people working with you, you had an infrastructure, you had capacity, you had really an organization. Would that be true?
Absolutely. It was definitely an organization. I had anywhere from 50 to 75 guys that directly worked for me, who I paid their salary every week, who they didn't get drugs and take them out and sell them. These guys worked for me, and they got a salary every single week. So I had about 50 to 75 guys just like that. Wow.
Okay. So I want to. There's several different routes we could take, but I want to deal with what you were doing in hip hop and the music industry. In your estimation, could you give us your understanding of how the business and hip hop, how they were connected early on?
Absolutely. Take for instance, for LA, for instance, I was doing hip hop. We were throwing parties. We had the turntables.
Give us like a time frame. So let's put that in perspective.
79, 80.
Okay.
We were throwing parties. Uncle Jam Army was already throwing parties. We were trying to copy what they were doing. Master Spade, who is the first guy in LA with a drum machine.
Wow. Where
Dr. Dre eventually learned how to produce on a drum machine. He got his cocaine from me.
Wow.
So they were definitely well connected. We believe that if you follow the cocaine trail, you will follow the rise in every city of hip hop. If you go from city to city, when New York got on is when New York rose into hip hop. When the South, or New Orleans, when they got on, with the Master P's and the Babies and the rest of them, if you follow the trail, you can see how they kind of boosted each other.
So okay, you're on the West Coast, and so things in terms of how that connected what was going on the East Coast, was there a connection between what you're doing? Because I understand that you weren't just in L.A. Eventually, you kind of branched out. Do you feel like you had an influence on the growth in other places?
Absolutely. The drugs started in L.A., but they transcended all over the country. It's the thing about drugs, they have a way of traveling, even though it doesn't have any power of its own. but the power that people give it allows it to travel not only around this country but around the world as well.
Okay, so fast forward, based on what you've been able to see today, what is your take on the industry today?
Well, definitely the guys who made it, I almost guarantee you had some form of somebody who was in the drug business who helped them with their finances, whether it helped them do shows, buy them clothes, buy them studio time, buy them equipment. Most of those guys got a boost from the streets. And that's why I believe hip-hop is so fascinated with the streets. You know, I tell them all the time, I don't necessarily care for the message that hip-hop is giving, but I understand. You know, when you're a young black male growing up in the ghetto, your first hero is going to be a drug dealer, more than likely.
Yeah. Okay, so, you know, there's a lot of people listening right now, and they're like, why Pastor G sitting up here interviewing somebody who, and they don't understand kind of, you know, I want them to really understand your perspective on what you just said. And that is basically, you know, when you give a young man a limited number of options, you can pretty much predict which way they're going to run.
Oh, no doubt.
And so can you really share, especially like early on, because you've even said that, you've even made statements about the fact that, with Crips and Bloods, people have their own perspective on them in terms of the violence and the gangs, but your perspective was a little different early on, the way you saw them interact and how the work that you were doing actually brought them together. So can you share that perspective even on your own, from your own life?
Well, at one time when drugs were plentiful in the neighborhood and money was flowing, was the first time that I'd ever saw after. I remember when the Crips and Bloods didn't fight. I remember when they played football against each other. And I can remember one time coming from the beach, we went on a bike ride to the beach, and when we got back, they had told us that somebody had killed one of the Bloods in the park. And that's the first time that we ever knew that the Crips and Bloods ever had a fight. Before that, we didn't know that the Crips and Bloods fought.
Right.
Only thing we knew was they were two separate neighborhoods who played football against each other. Well, after that, I had never saw Crips and Bloods together again. They were separated. But when we started selling drugs, you started to see Crips on Blood streets and Bloods on Crip streets. It was like they were working together for a common cause, and that common cause was for everybody to have economic gains. And some of my friends said that was the first peace treaty that we had in L.A. So definitely I saw them put down their differences in order to make money.
I really wish more people could hear what I'm about to ask you now, because we're going to get a little deep. Based on your experience, you've been through a lot, good, bad, and different. You know, how you came out, only God knows in your own head how you feel about how you've come out of all of that. But when you look at the opioid crisis that's going on in this country and you compare that and the response to that as opposed to what you dealt with early on, let me see. Let me read my question. When you see the opioid spreading throughout rural America, do you think politicians approach it differently than crack or powder, and why?
Absolutely. Totally different.
Why?
The opiate epidemic now is being dealt with as a medical problem and not a criminal problem. The crack cocaine was dealt with as a criminal problem. They took guys like me and made us appear to be animals, even though I have absolutely no violence in my background.
A lot of people don't realize that.
I have absolutely no violence in my background. The only violence they tried to put on me when I went to court was that I was a Crip. And the only way they could try to do that is because I stayed in a Crip neighborhood. But I've never told anybody that I was a Crip. I have no tattoos. I ran with some Crips before in high school, in junior high school. Some of my family members are Crips. My brothers are Crips. But I never gangbang. I never saw myself as a gangbanger. But they wanted to put that in my jacket in order to make it appear that I was this animal that they had been painting us out to be. Now with the opiate epidemic, it's urban white kids who are mostly getting involved. And they saying that it's a medical problem and not a criminal problem. So what that means is that these young white kids won't be going to prison for 20 and 30 years. They'll be going to treatment centers where the government has already allocated money to, because one of my friends own a treatment center for them to treat their illnesses. And I mean, I would hope that they're not doing it just because it's white. But they definitely...
Can we get real, though? Come on, let's just be real. I mean, because I am going to ask you about Maxine Waters, too. And whether or not there's a relationship there, if y'all ever talk. But let's just be... I want you to be frank about... Because you've been through a lot. And it's been because of a lot of what, you know, and I don't know about anybody else, but I would rather get your perspective on that than to even hear some other people's perspective on it. I mean,
my perspective is real, and it's from the middle of I mean, I've been handcuffed, beat in the head. You see all these scars in my face? This is all done while I was handcuffed. I let the dog bite me while I was handcuffed, and I didn't strike anybody. Only I did run from the scene. I ran from the scene. I was eventually caught. Once I was caught, I was called the N-word. I was kicked with boots. When I went to the doctor and got my exam for my injuries, I stayed in the hospital like 3 months. You could see the boot marks on my skin where people had been kicking me with, you know, the boots with the spikes on it. And when they kick you, they leave a red line. So I would have several red lines running down my back.
I understand why you were in jail. You had some infections and some other things going on.
I did. They hit me out for a couple weeks because they didn't want anybody to see me. And by that happening, my leg got infected. You know, I'm lucky that it didn't catch gangrene, like the doctor said. They eventually had a family doctor come in and see me. But yes, they hit me out. The same thing that Ibaka just got indicted for almost. You know, hiding inmates, not letting nobody see them. Well, I went through all that. So I definitely know that they treated us different than they are right now with the heroin epidemic.
And you've made comments to the effect that, hey, look, you know, you don't deal with a problem by focusing in on the limbs. You go straight to the root.
No doubt.
How do you feel about that with regard to what we're seeing now in the rural America and white urban America?
Well, I believe that they're going to do everything they can for this opiate epidemic, you know, for urban America. I don't think that they did the same thing when it was us on the other end. They treated us more like criminals. They felt that they could incarcerate their way out. You know, right now we got over 600,000 black men in prison for nonviolent drug offenses. You know, Obama let out a few thousand, but that was just a drop in the hat. You know, I knew a guy was 22 years old when he went to prison, and the only thing he went to prison for was selling drugs because he became a big drug dealer. You know, he was young. You know, he had Rolls Royces and Ferraris and all the toys, but he was still only 22 years old. They gave the man a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He wound up doing 30 years. He was just released a couple weeks ago, a good friend of mine. So when you see that happening, and you know it's not going to happen in the opiate epidemic, which I don't want it to happen. I don't think nobody who commits what they call a victimless crime. Drugs in the courthouse is considered a victimless crime. And what that means is that there's nobody that's going to come to court and say, oh, he hit me in the head with a bat. He put a pistol on me. He robbed me. He took my wallet. Well, no, in drug crimes, it's not like that because they said it is two consensual adults who are committing a crime together. So the crime that I committed on you who agreed for me to commit the crime on you. So for them to turn that into a violent act, they needed to add other elements to it to stipulate the violence.
So it just feeds the prison industrial complex, just feeds that machine.
Absolutely.
So if somebody told my 19-year-old son, hey, I'm about to show you how to make more money you've ever seen in your life. Okay, you know what I mean when I say that. If somebody was to tell him that, what advice or what would you tell him based on your experience? If somebody said that to him, what would you say to him?
Well, I would tell him they probably tell him the truth. If you do the right things, you could become rich and wealthy. But on the other end of that becomes heartache. You also may be looking at a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. You also might get killed, or kill somebody, or get your whole family killed. You know, when I sit in prison and when I was sitting out writing my book, I thought about the chances that I was taking and the sacrifice that I was willing to make. I had pretty much sacrificed my whole family's life because I have been in prisons with people who have went in and killed everybody in the house, including the babies. Yeah. So I know that those things take place inside of these games, and for me to have got into that game, I had put my whole family in jeopardy.
All right, they're telling me I got to wrap up. I know you got your book, Freeway Rick Ross.
I'm gonna come on the radio. I like your question. We're gonna try to do an interview on the air, man.
I try to study up. So I tell you what, you got a book. I want to talk about the book. I'm gonna pick up the book today. I kind of know quite a bit about you already, but I want to make sure that I share this on my Facebook page, Twitter, and all those places. Y'all get to looking for it. And if you have any questions for Freeway, just go and hit me up. This is Pastor G. I'll chat with y'all in a little bit. I'll be on the radio tomorrow, 4 o'clock p.m., 13:10 a.m. Talk to y'all later. Peace.